Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Ampligen, a general overview and the plan for ME CFS and Long COVID. Before we get started, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping notes so we all know how this is going to work. Our webinars are recorded and are going to be available on our YouTube channel. You can see the address for it there. You are muted, and you can use the question box to send us your questions. You'll see the question box at the bottom of the screen. Just enter a question there during the webinar, and our presenters will see it, and we'll take as many questions as time permits. And one last note, I wanted to let you know that SolveMe is unable to provide medical or legal advice during these webinars, so please keep that in mind when you're submitting your questions. All right, and with all of that covered, I'd like to turn the mic over to SolveMe President and CEO, Oved Amitai.
Thank you very much, Carmen. It's a pleasure to have all of you here with us today. We have a very, very special program, a packed program today, and we will be discussing Ampligen, a drug that really in many ways is an excellent example of why the interface between myalgic encephalomyelitis, chronic fatigue syndrome, ME CFS, and long COVID is so important. Ampligen is a drug that has been used in the past for ME CFS and is now about to be used in long COVID. There's a lot that we can learn from what has been done and what is about to be done. For this audience, we probably don't need to say a lot more about the fact that ME CFS and dysautonomia, including postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, known as POTS, are very common diagnosis for those with long COVID. We now, almost 2 years into the COVID pandemic, we know so much more about long COVID, but a lot of the findings initially were described by patient-led research, as was published by Davis et al. At The Lancet. So this is really an important aspect for us to look at. I wanted just to take a moment and maybe see with the audience today if we can pose the first polling question to understand what was the trigger for people in the audience who have either long COVID or ME CFS. What was the trigger of your disease? And for those of you who were not affected by that, please don't participate. So let's get the first question started.
We'll just keep it open for another few more moments here.
Great. Well, we have very interesting mix of people who have long COVID. The trigger for their disease was COVID-19. About 2/3 had other infection as the trigger, and for about a fifth, it is unknown. So, and also people with other triggers for their disease. So a very interesting mix of participants. I hope that what we hear today will be relevant for all of you. So before we dive in, I just want to emphasize one more thing, which is that our organization is committed to bring the most updated and most cutting-edge work that's being done on ME CFS and long COVID and other post-infectious diseases. As such, you will be hearing information that may not have been published in peer-reviewed journals yet, information that may have not been reviewed by regulators. But this is really the purpose: is really to get this information to all of us to review, for you to consider with your healthcare providers, really with the goal of making the best choices for managing your condition. So that's really the purpose of what we're doing here today. We want to make sure that the data that are presented were done in rigorous scientific ways and in an ethical way. But beyond that, we're not going to pass a judgment, and it really is ultimately for science to tell us where to go. So with that, I'd like to introduce the speakers, and the first part will be the CEO and CMO of AIM ImmunoTech, the developers of Ampligen. Tom, you'll be introducing the rest of the speakers, but we're delighted to have you on our program today. And without further ado, please, Tom Krells, CEO of AIM ImmunoTech.
Thank you very much, Ovid. I'm Tom Equals, the CEO of AIM ImmunoTech, and I'm here today with three scholars and medical professionals, David Strayer, Gunnar Gottschalk, and Charles Lapp, who are some of the most knowledgeable people, not only about ME/CFS and post-COVID chronic fatigue-like symptoms, but in the use of Ampligen in that space as well. So I look forward to talking to you today because you are one of the main reasons that I'm involved in working with Ampligen. I had the privilege of hearing testimonials of subjects, Ampligen subjects from the various clinical trials talking about their experience with ME/CFS and the difficulties they had in obtaining diagnosis and treatment, and the difference that Ampligen made in their life as a result of the clinical experience that they went through. And while that's not a statistically significant study, it gave me a snapshot that allowed me to understand that there was something very powerful at work here, and something that deserved my commitment to make sure that we do our best to serve this unmet medical need in this particular community and do it well. And we've been working very hard under a shifting set of circumstances to get ourselves into a position where we can take some meaningful next steps. And those shifting circumstances are often used as a rationale for delay or inaction. But in our particular instance, the shifting circumstances that I'm talking about has to do with the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, one of the things that caught my attention when COVID-19 erupted is that I had read an article several years before regarding the initial SARS outbreak. SARS, which is caused by the virus SARS-CoV-1, was the first lethal coronavirus outbreak that we've experienced in our lifetime. And that was in 2002, 2003, principally taking place in China, Hong Kong, and Indonesia. But a hospital from Hong Kong participated in a post-SARS study, and there was an article published in the American Medical Association's journal that looked at survivors of the SARS infection, and found that 2 years later, 27% of those survivors met the United States CDC guidelines for a diagnosis of serious chronic fatigue syndrome. Now, that fact stuck with me. And as we saw the eruption of SARS-CoV-2 on the scene and much larger populations being infected, we at AIM realized that this might provide us with an opportunity to co-join the work that we had been doing in ME/CFS with the post-COVID chronic fatigue symptoms. And the rationale for that was based upon a very impressive piece of work that was headed by Dr. Strayer, where in response to an FDA request, verbal request, that we looked to see if there were subsets that provided even more meaningful response rate than the original AMP516 study, which was a part of the new drug application. We did that, and a paper was published not too long ago in the Public Library of Sciences journal PLOS One, showing much higher rates of response when patients were treated earlier from the date of onset of symptoms. So our commitment to answering the complete response letter of the FDA and putting together a confirmatory trial that is designed to achieve extremely high rates of response is strong, and we look forward to working with you. And I want to express AIM's gratitude to Solve, because I believe that the most powerful thing that we have going for us now is that Solve and a few other organizations similar to Solve are finally standing up and speaking out in a very meaningful way and a very effective way for those afflicted with this devastating illness. Now, with that, I'd like to turn the podium over to Dr. Strayer, who's going to talk about the work that we've done and have been doing in narrowing the criteria for a confirmatory trial. And after that, Drs. Gottschalk and Lapp will be discussing some of the current things that are going on in the compassionate care clinics, which supply Ampligen for compassionate care and experimental uses in post-COVID. David, I'd like to turn it over to you at this point.
Thank you very much, Tom. I would also like to thank Solve ME for this opportunity to present an overview of Ampligen in ME Csf. So let's proceed. There's a lot of slides, so I'm going to be going relatively fast through these. I apologize up front. Slide number 2 is our forward-looking statements. I think we can get rid of that fast and move on to slide 3. So Ampligen, which is also known as renatolimod, is a broadly applicable immune therapy. It has the potential to be used in a wide range of indications. It is generally well tolerated, and it has orphan drug status for 6 different indications. It is also approved in Argentina for severe chronic fatigue syndrome. Let's move on to slide number 4. This slide shows our developmental pipeline, which includes ME Csf, as well as 8 different cancer indications. Let's move on to slide number 5. Ampligen's safety profile is related to its molecular structure. Ampligen is a double-stranded RNA with mispaired regions, and these are very important. They're shown in pink in the bottom figure. Those 3 pink areas are the mispaired regions, and these lead to a decreased toxicity compared to poly-IC, which is shown above in the top figure, which does not have these mismatched regions. Also, there is no development of antibodies with Ampligen, and importantly, Ampligen is a selective TLR3 agonist compared to poly-IC, which also activates helicases, which can increase toxicity. Moving on to slide number 6. Ampligen is a liquid preparation which can be given intravenously, intraperitoneally, and also intranasally. Its half-life in blood is approximately 40 minutes, and the dosage regimen used in ME Csf is 400 milligrams given twice weekly. And this yields peak blood concentrations of 50 to 60 micrograms per mil. Moving on to slide number 7. Ampligen has been generally well tolerated in clinical trials enrolling over 1,200 patients, including over 800 patients with ME Csf. In addition, over 100,000 doses have been administered with no drug-related deaths and no evidence of new autoimmune signals. Over 200 patients have received Ampligen for 1 to 2 years. You can basically use Ampligen as long as the patients are benefiting from it. Moving on to slide number 8. Ampligen is unique among TLR agonists in its mechanisms of action. It is the only TLR agonist to exclusively activate what's called the TRIF adapter, and it avoids the more toxic MYD88 pathway used by all other toll-like receptor agonists. Also, as I just mentioned, Ampligen is the only TLR agonist to avoid helicase activation. Ampligen also induces a wide range of immunologic, antiviral, and anti-tumor activities. And these are shown on the next two slides. Moving on to slide number 9. So the immunological activity of Ampligen has been demonstrated in a wide body of literature. And I want to go on now to slide number 10 just to discuss one of those publications. If you focus on the bottom of slide 10, it shows that Ampligen has been shown to increase natural killer cell activity. And we know natural killer cell activity has been shown to be decreased in patients with chronic fatigue syndrome. And more than that, the decrease has been related to the degree of the symptoms. So in the very beginning, the other interesting factor is that in Japan, when they began studying chronic fatigue syndrome, they named it natural killer cell deficiency disease. But now I'd like to move on to slide number 11. And just a brief summary of ME Csf. We know it's a debilitating disease with over 1 million people infected or diagnosed in the United States. The CDC has found that ME Csf is as debilitating as multiple sclerosis, systemic lupus erythematosus, and rheumatoid arthritis. And most patients have been ill for over 5 years. And the only approved therapy is Ampligen in Argentina for severe chronic fatigue syndrome. Let's move on to slide number 12. Ampligen in ME Csf is administered by IV infusion and is generally well tolerated with a favorable safety profile. The most frequent adverse event is a flu-like syndrome that is usually mild, consisting of headache, chills, fever, flushing, and myalgia. Let's move on to slide number 13. Ampligen's serious adverse event profile shows no difference compared to placebo. And the FDA Advisory Committee voted in favor of its clinical safety for commercial use. And there's no evidence of autoimmunity in any of our studies. Moving on now to slide number 14. With regard to the pivotal studies, AMP502 and 516, there was no significant difference in the number or the relationship of any serious adverse events to the study drug. If you focus on the bottom of that table, you see that the total number of serious adverse events was 22 for Ampligen cohort and 22 for the placebo. So there was no significant difference in the number of serious adverse events. And the next slide, slide number 15, we're looking now at all SAEs in the Ampligen chronic fatigue program. And there's no significant difference between Ampligen and the placebo groups in the relationship of the serious adverse events to the study drug. In addition, at the bottom, you can see that the percent of patients with serious adverse events was actually slightly higher in the placebo group, although this difference was not statistically significant. Let's move on to slide number 16. I think to save time, we'll go on to slide 17. I don't think we need to see the details in slide 16. Moving on to slide 17. With regard to Ampligen's efficacy in ME Csf, the primary endpoint in the phase 3 pivotal trial, AMP516, was exercise treadmill tolerance, or ETT. And this endpoint was met. Also, a 25% increase in ETT duration is clinically significant and meaningful, and I'll be showing you some of those data in a few minutes. Also, there's a greater percentage of Ampligen patients that increase their ETT by at least 25% than in the placebo cohorts. In the phase 2 study, AMP502, the primary endpoint, Karnofsky Performance Score, was also met. Let's move on now.
David, excuse me, could I interject something? I've noticed a few times you said MECSF instead of CFS, just so that we stay on track there.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
The AMP516 study 3 was designed to be a randomized and placebo-controlled study with 40 weeks of double-blinded treatment. The Ampligen dose was 400 milligrams, administered twice weekly by IV infusion. And with regard to the primary endpoint, exercise treadmill tolerance, there were 2 exercise strata, and these were pre-declared subsets for efficacy analysis and stratification at randomization. The full analysis set for efficacy consisted of 208 patients who completed a pre and post baseline exercise tolerance test. Let's move on now to slide number 19. This slide shows the results. The primary efficacy endpoint, change from baseline in mean ETT duration at week 40, is statistically significant for the ITT population. Please focus on the blue shaded areas on the bottom of the table. For the Ampligen group, the increase from baseline in seconds was 95.7. This compares to the placebo group, which was 28.2. So there was a difference of 67.5 seconds. And this was statistically significant with a p-value of 0.047. But it was also clinically significant because at 2 miles per hour on an incline grade of 12%, this is equivalent to walking 200 additional feet and at the same time climbing 3 flights of stairs with a vertical rise of 30 feet. And I'll be discussing more about vertical rise and Ampligen in a few slides. Moving on now to slide 20. When baseline ETT stratification was added to the ANCOVA model, the p-value actually improved to 0.033. So the complete ANCOVA model strengthened the p-value. Moving on now to slide 21. There were 3 pre-declared subsets. The first was patients without a significant dose, and these are all shown on the left-hand side. Second was the completer population, patients who completed the study. And the last one was patients that had a baseline ETT of over 9 minutes. And as you can see on the right side in the blue shaded areas, all of these 3 subsets that were pre-declared had better responses than the ITT population, with improvements in the 80s. And also the p-values were also accordingly lower. Moving on now to slide number 22. To summarize, the Ampligen 516 study met its primary endpoint, as we just discussed. Next slide.
David, before going to the next slide, if you could take just a moment and explain briefly to the audience what we're talking about when you refer to p-values and how important that is.
The p-values indicate the magnitude that you can say that these results were not due to chance alone. And the smaller the value, the more likely that they were not due to chance alone. So a smaller p-value is always better. Now moving on to slide number 3. This slide shows the responder analysis of at least a 25% increase in ETT from baseline. Both the ITT population and the 9-minute population show this greater improvement with Ampligen compared to placebo, as you can see, and they were both statistically significant. Let's move on now to slide 24. This is a continuous analysis of 5% response increments and shows a sustained Ampligen effect at each interval from greater than 25% all the way up to greater than 50%. So what we're seeing here as improvement is not only happening in patients that improve by 25%, it's happening by patients that improve at all of these steps. And a significant number of patients are improving by 50%, as you can see. Let's move on now to slide 25. This slide shows results of dichotomizing the Ampligen-treated ITT population based on significant clinical improvement of at least 25% at week 40 in ETT duration. So as you can see in this table, there's corresponding clinical significant improvements in secondary endpoints of KPS or Kronosky Performance Score and Vitality Score within the short form 36. And this is seen for the patients that improve by 25% or more. Their KPS improved by 10 points up to a 60. And that's a clinically significant difference, because at a 50 KPS, patient requires considerable assistance for daily care. This is multiple times a day from some caregiver. While at a 60, they require only occasional assistance, and they're able to care for most of their needs. Similarly, for the vitality score, this increase in the cohort was greater than 25% improvement, increased from 9.49 up to 24.10. That's a massive increase and indicates a much needed increase in the vitality in these patients. Let's move on now to slide 26. Slide 26 is a very important slide because it shows increases in vertical feet. Please focus just on that purple square. These are the patients from the ITT population that received Ampligen and improved by at least 25%. And you can see the 149 on top, that's feet. So these patients improve their vertical rise, or their ability to climb, by 150 vertical feet after the 40 weeks of Ampligen compared to baseline. While the patients that did not improve by 25% are shown in the gray, and they actually decreased by about 25 feet. So the difference between a responder and improving by at least 25% and a non-responder by not improving by 25% was actually 17 flights of stairs. So let's move on now to slide number 27. So based on these AMP516 study results, the FDA suggested that AIM identify a subset of ME CFS patients with a higher response rate. AIM decided to test this hypothesis that ME CFS patients with a shorter duration of disease would respond better to Ampligen. However, we also know that early in the disease, there can be spontaneous remissions. So let's go on to slide 28. It shows the definition of our target subset. The first requirement was onset of symptoms of chronic fatigue syndrome between 2 and 8 years before enrollment. Second was that they had post-exertional malaise. And third, an ability to walk on a moving treadmill. Let's go on now to slide number 29. The non-target population consisted of the subset of AMP516 ITT patients that did not meet the definition of responder subset. So all of the patients are included in this analysis. 133 were non-target and 75 were target. And those results are shown on the next slide, slide number 30, which shows the percent of patients with at least a 25% increase in ETT from baseline. There was greater improvement with the Ampligen compared to the placebo. And we see that first. Let's look at the ITT population, which we looked at in a few slides back. This is on the left side. And you can see that 39% of those patients improved their exercise tolerance by at least 25%. Compared to 23.1% of placebo patients. And this difference is statistically significant, and the difference is 15.9%. But now moving to the target subset in the middle, you see that now the majority of the patients, 51.2%, are improving by greater than 25%. And that the placebo patients there's only 17.6% that have improved by at least 25%. So the difference between the Ampligen and the placebo now is 33.6%. That difference is now twice what we had seen in the original study, the ITT population. And that is a very significant p-value. Now we're looking at 0.003. So this is so we plan to incorporate this target subset into our confirmatory study. And now if we look at the non-target subset, you see there was no significant difference between Ampligen and placebo in that non-target subset. Moving on now to slide 31, I just have a short summary here. So Ampligen has completed 2 pivotal clinical trials and has an active CFS NDA with the FDA. Ampligen has an orphan drug designation for chronic fatigue syndrome and an ongoing treatment protocol authorized by the FDA. Ampligen has received the FDA CFS Advisory Committee vote in favor of its clinical safety for commercial use. Ampligen has also been approved for severe CFS in the Republic of Argentina. And finally, as discussed in the last slide, AIM is developing a protocol for a confirmatory phase 3 ME/CFS trial. This is required for its US NDA. Now I'd like to change the subject here, shift gears if you would, just briefly to discuss post-COVID conditions. And I just wonder how many in the audience know what post-COVID conditions are. It's a relatively new term developed by the CDC, and it's now on their website. We have been calling these conditions long COVID, long haul COVID, post-COVID-19, post-acute COVID-19, etc. And CDC is now calling them post-COVID conditions. So let's move on to see more about this. Moving on to slide 33. Most patients or people with COVID-19 get better within weeks of their illness onset. However, some experience what the CDC is calling post-COVID conditions. Even asymptomatic patients or people with COVID-19 can develop post-COVID conditions. To see more, let's go to slide 34, which is the last slide. So what are these post-COVID conditions? The CDC defines the post-COVID conditions as a wide range of new ongoing health problems experienced 4 or more weeks after the initial infection with the SARS-CoV-2 virus. The current CDC post-COVID condition list is shown on the bottom of the slide and contains 18 different health issues. So at this time, most of these actually are related to chronic fatigue syndrome. They overlap more than half with chronic fatigue syndrome. So at this time, I would like to turn the webinar over to Dr. Charles Lapp, an expert, as we all know, in chronic fatigue syndrome, to discuss his experience with Ampligen in ME/CFS and in post-COVID conditions.
And Dr. Lapp, before you begin, I want to say that we're honored to have you with us today. And Dr. Lapp is pioneering a project that we worked to amend our AMP 511 protocol to include post-COVID conditions, and he's treating the first subject. So Chuck, we turn the floor over to you with gratitude at your ability to show up for us today.
Thanks very much, Tom. I appreciate it. And that's what I'm going to talk very briefly about is the new long COVID program that we've been working on. There have been over 70 million people, Americans, infected with COVID to date. And at least 10% of them are having these persistent symptoms that David was talking about, and that we call long haulers or having post-COVID chronic fatigue. Up to 50% of those who were hospitalized in the ICU have been found to have post-COVID chronic fatigue or be a long hauler. So that means that there are some 70 to 35 million individuals that have persistent COVID symptoms, and many report feeling that they've been unsupported or dismissed by their providers. They just don't feel that they have been understood. And we felt that some action needed to be taken. There needed to be some treatment for these long haulers. So we're currently completing a very small pilot study, 5 to 10 long haulers, that's all it is. And it's based on 3 premises. The first premise is that COVID, which is SARS-CoV-2, that's the virus, is similar to the SARS virus, the original SARS virus known as SARS-CoV-1, which caused severe acute respiratory syndrome in 2003, as Tom had mentioned earlier. And in a study of those patients, 40% had persistent chronic fatigue for a couple of years after having contracted the SARS virus. About 30%, as Tom mentioned, met the case definition criteria for chronic fatigue syndrome. SARS type 1 is another virus that can trigger chronic fatigue syndrome as a post-infectious type illness. The second premise was that many long haulers have symptoms that are similar to ME/CFS. And the third premise was that Ampligen has been shown effective against the SARS-1 virus, at least in the animal population. And as we've pointed out this afternoon, it's been effective in patients with ME/CFS as well. So with those ideas in mind, we hypothesized that Ampligen may help long haulers to recover from their illness. And the sooner the therapy is started, we expect the better the response would be. Fortunately, long haulers are coming to us very early in their illness, and we are able to catch it much earlier than we could with chronic fatigue syndrome, which may go undiagnosed for many years, as most of you know. Well, the long and short of it is that we have been approved for 5 patients here at the Hunter Hopkins Center for this pilot study. 4 have completed the study already. And they went through the standard protocol, 400 milligrams twice a week of Ampligen for 6 months. We haven't analyzed all the data yet. The analysis is ongoing, but we've seen good results clinically in the patients. So 4 have completed the 6-month study. Of those, 3 have improved with their CFS-like symptoms, and 2 were happy enough with the result that they had that they have chosen to continue with Ampligen therapy even after the pilot study has continued. We've had 1 patient so far showed no improvement, and we don't understand that, but hopefully we'll straighten that out. So at least preliminarily, we have a positive response to the Ampligen, and we're contemplating a larger study in the future. It'd be very interesting to see how that will turn out. I wish I had more to say on it, but just a quick overview of what we've been doing over the past several months.
Well, Dr. Lapp, we're very grateful for you being a pioneer in this space, because we firmly believe, as you do, that post-COVID, when this pandemic is over, there's going to be a second wave of epidemic, and it's going to be people that have recovered from acute COVID but have the chronic fatigue conditions that we are also familiar with. And if I might point out, when we looked at the survey that Solve did at the beginning, well, the percentage that were here because they were suffering from conditions post-COVID, I think was 13%. Other infections made up approximately 2/3. And we know from anecdotal information collected by Cimarron and Incline Village, by you at Hunter Hopkins, and from our review of clinical notes, that subject after subject after subject talked about recovering from an acute respiratory flu-like illness only to come down with chronic fatigue subsequently. So we
Absolutely.
see a pattern there that's very important. And with that, our other partner in the AMP-511 program at the clinic that's out in Incline Village, Nevada, Dr. Gottschalk, I'd like to thank you. And we're honored to have you here. And if you'd like to speak about your experience and also the availability at Incline Village to take on new patients.
Great, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity, and I am thankful to be here to discuss some of the collaborative projects that we currently have going on. We have been, along with Cimarron Research, we have been working with Dr. Daniel Peterson on this trial for more than a decade. We have looked at a series of individual case reports, looking back retrospectively, trying to figure out, again, when we talk about who is a responder, who isn't, I noticed a lot of the questions from the audience were kind of talking about that. We're trying to identify mechanisms that can identify responders more completely so that we can have this drug approved. It's a very important drug. And I'll just say that Dr. Peterson has treated hundreds of these individuals safely over the years, and we're very confident in our ability. And we would really like and are seeking enrollment into the ongoing Ampligen 511 trial that not only includes chronic fatigue syndrome patients, but also the long haul COVID patients. I have no disclosures to declare on this. So one of the first things that we did, right, is we started looking back at, why does this one site? And again, what I'm going to be discussing here is a single site analysis. So it's very much nested. Dr. Peterson has treated a bunch of these individuals. We have, I believe, over 150, maybe 157 individuals over the years, the various trials. And one of the things we had to do first was to standardize the data, put it into a readable format. And that included taking the actual CRFs, which is what the case report folders that hold the questionnaires for each individual protocol, but then also marrying those CRFs with the clinical files that Dr. Peterson has kept and maintained over the year. With those two things combined, we then put it into a REDCap server, which allows us, thankfully, again, with Solve Me Csf, we have the ability to utilize their data dictionary to send out a lot of the same questionnaires quite easily. But through this, we were able to not only take a look at the standard trial measures. For example, Dr. Strayer spoke a lot about the KPS, the Karnofsky Performance Scale, the Sf36, all the other questionnaires. We were also taking a look at other lab values that could be of interest that Dr. Peterson had taken. And unfortunately, just by the design of these trials, not, a lot of those factors and a lot of those specialized laboratories, they weren't included in the protocol. So our numbers dropped significantly, but nonetheless, we still have some interesting data to show. And we've had great collaborators, including Dr. Beth Unger, Dr. Sally Lin at the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. They have been independently verifying these records, which is very helpful. I told we have to do science blinded. It's how we figure things out. So we're very thankful for that collaboration. One of the first things that jumped right out on us was the Sf36 score. So we had a large patient group, approximately, this group included 81 individuals. And these are the individual domains of the questionnaire. And again, these are only in Dan Peterson's clinic, but we were able to show a significant reduction. And, in this graph, the way the Sf36 is, the higher the number, the gray kind of graph here is, is showing at week 24 versus baseline. An increase in this includes, for example, the physical activity summary. You have increased physical activity. Vitality is vitality. These are all domains that are scored individually. So at least in Dan's patient population, we've been able to sort of nestedly look at this. And that also speaks to Dr. Strayer's work that was already published in PLOS One. We just looked at our own site individually. And there was another question I noted. We didn't just look at baseline and week 24 or week 48. Some of these patients have been on for a long time. In this graph, we show individuals going all the way out to 240 weeks. The single site assessment of the investigator sepsis, this is another questionnaire that is actually pretty convenient, because if you look at it closely, it more or less correlates with the diagnostic criteria that's necessary to be part of this trial. So all we did is we just turned this into a Likert score. And we showed in these patients of 81 folks that there was a significant reduction in these symptoms. And you can see these symptoms outlined, very similar to what we also have seen now clinically with long COVID, but these are what make up the clinical criteria for chronic fatigue. So we do see a sustained response very far out in quite a large group of people. Now, those first two slides I showed were just what were in the case report folders, right? What's, what is collected by the sponsor when we have protocols. We also too continuously participated in all of the VO2 max testing that was necessary for the clinical trial. In addition, we had a series of other nested studies where we looked at VO2 max scores. We've done this in 2-day testing paradigms in collaboration with Dr. Stacy Stevens and the Workwell Foundation, other groups that have sort of led that process. But from these larger group of patients, just from their patient medical records alone, we were looking at VO2 max utilizing a max testing paradigm. So that requires specific criteria. And why this is important, at least historically it has been that if you have a specific VO2 max above 20 milliliters per kilogram per liter of oxygen, for example, you are entitled to you no longer are entitled to disability status. So VO2 max testing, a max test paradigm, there's a lot smarter people who are making recommendations about if we should do a 2-day test, 1-day test. We feel pretty confident in at least this 1-day test. We can show that sustained over a period of time, at least in this smaller nested group of individuals, there was a highly significant increase in the VO2 max itself. And VO2 max at anaerobic threshold is quite different in some respects than time on treadmill. So we're excited to put this data. These data are being under reviewed currently, but I'm here showing them. The other interesting caveat we found clinically was NK cell function. This was a little bit trickier. When you study NK cell function itself, it's a complicated assay. And part of that requires the use of radioactive materials. And so when you're comparing values of natural killer cell function that are commercially available, you run into a reference range issue, essentially. But even within this sort of nested study, we did find a significant increase across the board with respect to LU10 value, which is lytic unit 10 value, which is the actual amount of eating, if you will, natural killer cells do with respect to defeating viruses, whatever else is going on. And if you look at individual factors, you can see there are individuals that, directly after baseline at 24 weeks have an increase in the LU10 value. It's different for each person, but this is some of the aggregate data that we have been able to develop just by, again, looking back. And if you see behind me, just really quickly, these are all the charts. So this was a lot of scanning and a lot of work we've put together. It's taken a lot of time, but we're proud to kind of have this in this position, at least so that, again, we can share these types of things we've already built with other collaborators like Dr. Lapp, et cetera. Our current project that is still ongoing is what we're calling AmpStart. This is in collaboration with Dr. Maureen Hansen. In 2018, we had a period of time where the drug wasn't available. We had to have a stop in the clinical trial for about 6 months. And what we did is we tried to design a study where we knew we had people on the drug who had responded quite favorably for many years, but then they were taken off the drug for these outside circumstances. So we then designed a study around to say, okay, well, what's really happening in the patient, in the blood? So we took samples before they restarted the drug, and then again, longitudinally, actually every week, all the way out to 9 months. We also didn't just include people that took the Ampligen therapy. We have other intravenous therapies that are given by Dr. Peterson, including intravenous gamma globulin, intravenous antivirals, amino acid infusions, saline, obviously Ampligen. We even have people now that we're just trying to track who aren't on any of these drugs. That's really important for us. And we've taken a whole bunch of samples on these, including total blood leukocytes, which are the white blood cells separated from the whole blood. And Dr. Hansen, we're just about, she is in the process of, reviewing the data that we have on these appropriately sized individual subgroups of patients. And we're hoping to see that publication very soon. And that should give us a good idea at the molecular level, potentially about who might be a decent responder. And we'll also, by virtue of that, really gain a better understanding of what happens when someone actually gets Ampligen infused into their body. Myself, along with my Chief Scientific Officer, Dr. Avik Roy, we're very interested in an example about animal models of this disease. And so the way that we get targets to look at that stuff is through these human data. So we have a lot going on. We, Cimarron, as our group, we have everything available publicly, just like Solve ME. I would encourage anyone in the audience to please reach out to me directly if you're interested with respect, and you can find that contact information on clinicaltrials.gov. We are enrolling individuals with long COVID. We have continuous enrollment of patients with ME CFS, and we're excited to see what the future brings. I'd like to thank the team that's done all this, particularly the nursing staff, my coordinators, my research coordinators, Marco Maynard, 16 Picard, my Chief Scientific Officer, Dr. Avik Roy, and the sponsor and everyone else for the ability to present this today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gunnar. Well done.
Wonderful.
I'd like to add a few concluding remarks, if I may, before we go into the question and answer session. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Sure.
Please go ahead, Tom.
The reason we're here today is because there's a huge population of patients with a serious unmet medical need. And we know how hard it's been for you as patients to be believed, to be understood, to find somebody who understands what's going on and can help you. And you have to realize that all of the people involved here, not just the patients, have encountered that same problem over the years. We're a small company. We're not a huge pharma company. We have great scientists at Hunter Hopkins and Cimarron that are working on this. But this is not a team of 500 PhDs from Johnson & Johnson or Merck. These are committed individuals because they believe in you, the people with chronic fatigue syndrome, and they believe that there is a need for a therapy, and they've committed their lives to making that happen. And we see that same commitment and the progress that can come from that commitment with Solve. Just because this is a giant problem doesn't mean it can't be defeated. We think back to, the giant Goliath and the Philistines. David went out there by himself, a boy, and defeated Goliath. Why? Because he believed. So we need to make that our strength and work hard to complete this task and bring a therapy to everyone who needs it for this problem.
Tom, thank you so much for saying that. We're really getting this commitment from you is incredibly important. We only have a few minutes for the questions, so maybe I'll start with some of the maybe more time-sensitive questions. And Tom, I think you'll probably maybe the best to answer the first couple of questions that are related to your plans, the timing that you expect for starting of the clinical trials, and a few other related questions in the clinical trials that are in your plans. Will the drug be provided to participants? Will it be covered? Will it be provided free of charge as part of the clinical trials? And what are your plans geographically? One specific question was about people in the Midwest. Will they be able to participate in the clinical trials? So maybe if you could share more about the plans for the upcoming clinical trials.
Well, the research that we're doing now, the research from PLOS ONE, the work that Dr. Gottschalk and Dr. Lapp are doing, are all going to be instructive in helping us to formalize the protocol that we would propose to the FDA for the confirmatory trial. And that's ongoing, but we believe that we'll see results sometime in the course of this year that will allow us to start to refine what that protocol looks like, so as to increase not only our chances for success, but try to design something that is easier to administer and less likely to have vagaries in it that are because of design-related issues as compared to simple analysis of the data. Now, with that being said, I can't give a precise commitment because the second issue is this confirmatory trial will be extremely expensive. We do confirmatory trials in cancer and viral research, but the treatment period is very short compared to the treatment period that would be a part of this confirmatory trial for ME/CFS, which extends the length of the study and the cost of the study. So we have to try to put something together so that we can actually know that we can pay for it before we begin it. And that having been said, if we were to do this study, similar to when we did AMP516, there would be, right now there are only 2 sites that are a part of AMP511, Incline Village, Nevada, and Charlotte, North Carolina. However, at that point in time, there were several sites, and it would be our plan to have multiple sites. And as a part of that program, it's our plan to supply the Ampligen at our cost as the sponsor of the clinical trial. So that I think I saw some of these questions on the question and answer board, and so I think that probably addresses most of those points of it.
Tom, any specific comment about the long COVID trials? Is there a different timeline for that?
Well, I think that to the extent possible, we would like to see what the availability of such a trial might be once we get more data out of the subjects that we're treating right now in AMP511. We have, I believe, 6 subjects. Is that correct, Chuck? That have been treated at Hunter Hopkins?
There have been 4 treated so far and approved for 5.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. And then there are a few subjects in the process out at Incline Village, correct, Gunnar?
Yes. Yeah. We've been ready and waiting to accept individuals. Yeah.
So we'd like to get those numbers up because 4 subjects treated doesn't give us the ability to make any statistically significant conclusions from the data. So we'd like to see 20, 30, 40 subjects, which would allow us, if the data is good and strong and positive, to create an impetus for going to the FDA for a specific confirmatory type phase 2 that has phase 3 potential and perhaps even emergency use authorization and new drug application potential. But we need people to participate in these programs because that's the data that will allow us to move forward.
So maybe
again, we're supplying the Ampligen at our cost in those post-COVID programs.
So maybe Gunnar will give you an opportunity to make some comments about how to contact you so people know. And then we will try to answer the rest of the questions in writing. Unfortunately, we're not have more time to address other questions. So Gunnar, maybe you get the last words.
Yeah, I put my email in the chat. It's ggottschalk@cimarron.com, and I'll ask Kamala, the organizer, to please share that. We're looking forward to it. Right now the current status is, with the chronic fatigue patients, is a cost recovery trial. As Tom just mentioned, the COVID protocol is different. So it's certainly something we are interested in having people participate, and we really thank you. And we're hopeful to be able to share our REDCap data system with people like Dr. Lapp and others who we can just kind of put data into more streamlined mechanisms and have it reviewed by a third party like the CDC.
And Cimarron's on the West Coast. Dr. Lapp is on the East Coast, and Charlotte, North Carolina, at the Hunter Hopkins facility, Dr. Charles Lapp.
Wonderful. Well, we're coming on the top of the hour. This is unfortunately at the time for us to close this webinar, but I wanted to thank all of the participants for sharing a lot of information, a lot of data, so we are all up to date on what's going on. And we're very much looking forward to hearing more about updates, Dr. Lapp, from you, and really understand more about long COVID, ME CFS, and how can ultimately treatment can be developed for both of these diseases. So with that, thank you very much for all the participants today. The webinar will be posted on our website. And Carmen, I'll ask you then to close today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.